Healthy forests can mean smaller and less intense wildflowers, increased forest resilience to pests, drought and disease, and greater mitigation against climate change and water supply protection. A healthy forest also promotes healthy populations of plants and animals, and it's essential to preventing extinction. Forest and tree health decline does not happen all at once, and there are many things that can impact the health of a forest or a tree. So you'll see on the left side of this diagram, you'll see biotic factors. So these are all kinds of like living things. And on the right side of the tree, these are some abiotic factors, which are non-living factors that influence the environment, like temperature or storm damage, mechanical damage, and things like that. So this whole diagram is set up to illustrate that not a single event or causes the death of a tree or a forest, but a single factor can stress out a tree enough that they're predisposed to death if other stressors come along. So Mannion's spiral, I bet a lot of you guys are already familiar with this diagram, shows the process of diminishing forest health, kind of illustrates what I'm talking about. So forest and tree health decline are caused by interchangeable predisposing, inciting, and contributing factors. Predisposing factors are factors like climate, site selection, genetic potential, and age, and these can reduce the potential for trees to withstand injury or biotic attack. Predisposing factors also include suppression and competition, which are often a result of invasive plant species taking over an ecological niche. Inciting factors are usually events like drought or defoliation rather than chronic conditions. They result in the first symptoms as decline and reduce the tree's ability to tolerate adversity. In other words, trees get stressed if they can, and they can't fight off the pests and diseases that easily. Finally, contributing factors include anything that we just discussed, plus a variety of pests and pathogens that create or contribute to the decline once incited. They include damage and disease brought on by a wide variety of secondary pests and pathogens, and we're going to talk about those. That's going to be the bulk of this presentation. So usually forest insect pests are an example of a biotic inciting or contributing factor. Often, insect pests are a secondary issue, meaning alone they won't kill a tree or make a forest unhealthy, but they may cause significant damage if a tree is already stressed by drought, flooding, age, or other predisposing factors. Forest insects and diseases kill more trees and claim more timber in the United States than any other forest stress agent. They can cause significant growth loss, degrade timber, make trees vulnerable to attack by secondary insects and diseases, spread tree pathogens, and generally just be a serious nuisance. This isn't just the loss of trees to mortality, but it's also the loss of productivity that we're looking at here. So if you're interested in harvesting your forest at some point, forest insect pests are definitely something that you're going to want to be aware of. All right, so before we get any further, let's talk about exactly what makes an insect a pest. As an entomologist, I feel that it's pretty important to point out that a pest is generally defined as any organism whose biology, behavior, or location places it in direct conflict with humans. So it's entirely subjective. You know, they're just living their lives. We're the ones who deem whether they're pests or not. So insects that threaten human health, destroy food, damage structures or landscapes, or cause general annoyance or anxiety, these can all be considered pests. And this means whether an insect is considered a pest depends on the person, the situation, and the objectives of the landowner. So again, it's just important to remember that the vast majority of insects in the forest are not pests, and indeed most insects that feed on trees do not cause serious harm. This is definitely the case in the Pacific Northwest. You guys are lucky that most of these populations are in a really excellent ecological balance, and you really don't need to be worrying about insect pests too often, which is great. So trees have evolved along with the insects that are native here, and they're tolerant of feeding under normal circumstances. Also, many insects play important roles in the forest ecosystem, including pollination, nutrient cycling, and soil health and decomposition. And they're an important food source for many animals. So they're also very beneficial for keeping other pest populations down, and we're definitely going to talk about that dynamic later on. But insects truly do make the world go round. And I know a lot of you guys, I'm preaching to the choir with this already. A lot of you already definitely know that from a pollinator perspective. But it's important to recognize that decomposers and all different types of trophic levels are important too. All right, so I'm going to start this talk talking about native pests. And most of these fall into the group of secondary pests. meaning that they can't kill a healthy tree on their own. It's got to be weak or stressed for them to overcome it. So native pests are pests that have always existed here, that our native trees have co-evolved along with. They are not invasive exotic pests. Those are the ones I'm going to be unpacking a little bit later. I'm going to spend a little more time on bark beetles today because of the significance that they have in Western forests specifically. Bark beetles can be both good and bad for our forests in Washington. They're native decomposers, pollinators, and food for wildlife, but they can also cause tree mortality, and that is currently being exacerbated by climate change. In general, bark beetles attack conifers that are already stressed. I'm starting to sound like a broken record here. So if you see a bark beetle attacking a tree, usually that's a sign that there's like something else going on with that tree that's making it sick or weakened. The best thing to do when you see a tree being attacked by bark beetles is to see what weakened the tree to this attack. Like, was it a lightning strike or mechanical damage from a pre-commercial thin? Perhaps it's drought. Maybe it's covered in ivy. Things like that are the sort of stuff that you want to look out for. One of the best management approaches is to try to maintain tree health as best you can to avoid bark beetle attack in the first place. So as bark beetles attack the tree, they feed under the bark and they create their galleries, which you can see in these lower images here. These adults create the egg galleries, and all of the young beetle larvae radiate off of those galleries in these surrounding lines that you can see on the sides here. So this is what we call the nuptial chamber. The original adult bark beetle will have burrowed into about somewhere around here. They lay their eggs, and then the eggs hatch, and the larvae feed their way out, and they create these unique shapes that we call egg galleries. The cool thing is that you can often identify which species are attracting the tree by the shape of the gallery. So you can see that the galleries from the Douglas fir beetle here are different from the galleries, the Douglas fir pole beetle and the Douglas fir engraver beetle over here. So speaking of, Douglas fir beetles are, like all other bark beetles, hard-bodied, cylindrical adults that are brownish black in color, super, super small, and the larvae are white grubs. So all of these guys look really, really similar. That's why oftentimes we do rely on the beetle gallery shape to identify them, or just you can send them into like WSU Extension or the USDA for molecular identification. The Douglas fir beetle is a common bark beetle that kills Douglas fir trees in the West. Attacking beetles bore under the bark, they mate there, and they create these vertically oriented galleries. Gallery construction and feeding on the inner bark of the trunk is what kills the trees. And damaged trees will fade to a deep reddish brown color. As shown right here, you can see a pocket where a bunch of Douglas fir beetles have attacked. During attacks, reddish or yellowish boring dust often accumulates. So you can see that here. That's just a combination of frass or beetle poop, and also the just kind of like their feeding excess that they spit out of their boring holes. So you'll see this accumulating in the bark of the tree on the outside. Also, you may see clear streamers of pitch or sap may run down the bark of the tree. That's another really great indicator that that tree is stressed out. Douglas fir beetle outbreaks occur usually in areas of wind-thrown trees or at sites damaged by fire or defoliation by other sites. That's because stressed out or recently downed trees send out a really great particular smell that attracts bark beetle populations, and will attract them in groups to one area in the forest. So it's not really something that you'll see spread out. You'll often see bark beetle infestations occurring in pockets like this. That's why your best defense, and I'll definitely be mentioning it again, is to promote stand vigor by thinning. Prompt removal of wind-thrown, severely fire-damaged trees or trees damaged by other stand disturbances is always recommended if you can get those down trees out of there. Attacks are always most severe in unmanaged stands or on trees that are largest in diameter that are too dense. And if direct control is needed in high value trees, trees can be protected using the anti-aggregation pheromone known as MCH, and that disrupts beetle aggregation, which is really, really cool. It basically just confuses their little sense receptors. Beetles communicate through smell, and it will basically be telling them that there is no food food here. Do not worry about stopping through for a buffet, and they will go elsewhere. So it's man-made, but it really works well, and it doesn't have a lot of ecological impacts on your surrounding forest. Pretty cool. Secondary bark beetles, Douglas fir pole beetle, Douglas fir engraver beetle, and another unnamed engraver beetle, Scolitis monocole, are other bark beetles that are present in the United States. These guys are all secondary stressors. They can cause mortality in smaller trees and top kill or branch kill larger trees. And they typically attack small diameter and thin barked portions of logging slash. They're often associated with Douglas fir beetle and may attack larger trees that are already stressed by, again, drought, defoliation, blowdown, fire scorch, mechanical damage, this kind of thing. So secondary bark beetles, these guys will come in after a Douglas fir pole beetle attack, or a Douglas fir bark beetle attack. So sometimes or often, if the blowdown is bad enough or the communication is strong enough, you'll get a bunch of different species of bark beetles all coming together on the same pocket of trees, and that's where you can see some real damage be done. This isn't terribly common, I just want to say, but it does happen, and so it's good to know if you see, pockets of suddenly dead trees, that might be something that's going on there. Okay, wood borers in general, these are another category of very common pests in the Pacific Northwest. In Oregon and Washington, all conifers are host to one or more wood borer species. I wanted to point these out because I know that these guys are usually really easy to spot. And so people will see them and think that their trees are under attack and they have to go into damage control immediately and start managing for them. And that is definitely not the case. So most of these native wood borers are non-aggressive secondary pests that mostly attack dead or dying trees. They're frequently found in trees too, infested or killed by bark beetles or root disease, which Dr. Brooks spoke on at length in our previous webinar. They're often especially abundant in recently burned areas, so that's a common theme. They also play an important role in cycling woody material back into the soil, and they're a good food source for woodpeckers. So these guys are good. They may feed on the trees, but the trees have co-evolved to exist with them. I just wanted to point out this guy, which does look pretty similar to the emerald ash borer, which is an invasive insect pest that was recently spotted in Oregon. And this guy, which is sort of similar to the Asian longhorn beetle that we need to be a lookout for. Just so I'll be introducing them in slides later so you can learn which characteristics belong to which insects, but just want you to be aware of that. Okay, I'm not going to get into these specifically, except for this. Okay, so the banded alder borer is this longhorn beetle here, a type of wood borer. These guys usually lay their eggs on dead branches of alder, maple, ash, willow, hardwood species like that. But the larvae bore into the center of dead twigs. So they really are at most a cosmetic pest. They're not going to kill your tree. Interestingly, adults are attracted to fresh paint, so don't be surprised if this insect shows up next time you're painting your house. The fresh paint must smell a lot like the aggregation pheromone that they're looking for to find their next good meal. So I've actually seen that in real life before, them landing on a freshly painted shed. Okay, so this is the damaging exotic pest, the Asian longhorn beetle. It is not yet known to be established in Washington, but because they burrow into wood, it could show up any day, just because most of these invasive species arrive through global trade or shipping materials, and because we are home to so many ports, it's a definite possibility that this guy could be arriving. So it's important to know what to look for. The Asian longhorn beetle has these really cute blue feet and blue spots in their antennae. Also, their antennae are about twice as long, and they're not banded, they're spotted with a black shiny surface. So just know your beetles there. So in case you do see one that shows up, or if you're ever confused, you can contact your nearest county extension office, the USDA or the DNR, and we'll help you get it sorted. I'm going to get into this one really quickly because this is a question that I often get. Western cedar borers, or called red powder worm, they are a flat-headed wood boring beetle that cause a problem called wormy cedar. This does not often kill the tree, hardly ever. And infested trees will appear normal and healthy. And the best way to know if you do have them in there is to cut off a limb and you'll be able to see these boring tunnels. I only want to bring it up because people will notice these on their porches or on the outside of their cedar trees that unfortunately are dying. In pretty big quantities, but across Washington. But we're beginning to think more and more that that is due to more climate change and drought. It is not the fault of the Western cedar borer. At this point in the conversation, too, I always mention that we have a really excellent publication that just came out tracking Western red cedar death. That just came out of a really great multi-agency collaboration in Washington. And because that's behind a paywall, because that's how these things work, just let me know in the chat or email me if you would like to receive that publication and I can send it to you for your own interest for free. All right, we're going to move on to defoliators. This is an important distinction. Again, larvae defoliators they feed directly on hardwood and conifer foliage. They're often the larvae of moths or butterflies. Like other native pests we've discussed, they can stress a tree out or predispose it to other pests, but they are also a secondary pest and rarely kill the trees on their own. Some common defoliators you may run across are the western spruce budworm, western hemlock looper, forest tent caterpillar, Pacific tent caterpillar, and western tent caterpillar. I bet that you guys have seen the Pacific tent caterpillar and the western tent caterpillar because they do this really great dance that they think is super scary when you pass by them. And they will kind of like rear up on their back ends and like thrash about because they think that that's, yeah, super, intimidating. And I noticed it right when I moved out here. They were all over the place in Anacortes. And they're some of the first species to appear in late spring, early summer. So just know that, yeah, they do cause some cosmetic damage. Maybe they'll gross you out, but defoliators typically are not a problem that needs to be managed at all. The tree will not succumb to their damage alone, and it always bounces back. It just might be missing a few leaves and needles. Okay, so yes, the western spruce budworm. Hosts include Douglas fir, true firs, Engelmann spruce, and western larch. During outbreaks, larvae may also feed on the foliage of non-host understory trees like pines. And western spruce budworm mostly feeds on current year foliage, and that can cause growth loss. So to contradict myself a little bit, if you do have chronic heavy defoliation, like over 4 years of this, this could cause top kill mortality. Excuse me. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Allergies. So yeah, so they can cause some kill mortality, and that can predispose the trees to stress and weaken them and cause them to be susceptible to bark beetle infestation down the road. So again, the best management is prevention. And when managing forest stands for western spruce budworm, it's important to selectively thin to increase spacing between hosts and favor even age stands. Okay, so now we're going to get into non-native insect pests. So these are guys that do not exist here naturally. They have arrived. We'll get into how, but mostly for where we are, they've arrived through global trade, on pallets, people moving firewood, or even in ornamental species from abroad being sold in like Home Depot and Lowe's and things like that. So they have all been introduced to the United States. So non-native invasive pests, they're an increasing problem in the US and all around the world. Monitoring and preventative management are your best tools, just like with invasive plant species. When outbreaks occur, they're often difficult or impossible to control. So proper forest management, and that means early detection of infestations and practices that promote predatory populations, insect populations, are key. Get to know the invasive species in your area so you can be on the lookout. If you regularly scout your land for common invasive species, you're more likely to detect them at a point where prevention or eradication is still possible down here at the beginning of the curve. And that just means if you are able and fortunate enough to have land and also able to walk that land, I say do it as much as you can. It's a really great thing to be able to get to know the spots of your own woods so you can kind of know when something is wrong, notice when something's a little bit off, and probably tackle it in the earlier stages after the problem gets out of control. I'll talk about this in a bit, but a really great example of that is how well the state of Oregon has handled the recent introduction of emerald ash borer into Forest Grove, Oregon, right on a border also. There has been a tremendous interagency coordinated front that has effectively contained the breakout, and they have not seen new beetles or new infestations for the last 2 years, which is just really incredible, and such a great success story when compared to how out of hand and devastating this insect pest has become in the Midwest and the Eastern United States. Okay, so that lecture's over. I won't bother you guys with the pop quiz because I won't hear you anyway. Um, Okay, so I wanted to talk about, yes, the emerald ash borer. It's a destructive invasive insect. It accidentally introduced to the Midwest in the 1990s. And since then, it has spread and devastated ash tree populations all across the Midwest, all across the Eastern US. It is really sad. Basically, we've gotten to the point where there is no quarantine because everything is too far gone. And if you have ash trees in an urban or suburban area, they're all getting ripped up and replaced with comparable diverse hardwood species. It's just really sad. So in June 2022, it was found infesting an ash in Northwest Oregon in Forest Grove, like I said. It will kill native and ornamental ash trees in Washington if left unchecked. Significantly, this will impact both natural ecosystems and urban and community forests. In urban areas, killed ash trees are unsightly, and they also they may result in hazardous situations, and that will increase landscaping costs. Um, Emerald ash borer it almost exclusively attacks ash trees. And it's native to Northeast Asia, where the ash trees have co-evolved to develop resistance, like we talked about with all of our native insect pests. Unfortunately, this is not the case for Oregon ash, the only ash tree native to Washington. And this is an ecologically important component of our riparian forest in the southwest part of the state. So it's habitat for threatened species, Oregon ash is. It shades and keeps streams cool, which is really important for our benthic macroinvertebrates and our fish populations and all of the trophic cascades that go along with those, feeding on those things. And it's also an important cultural resource. So they feed on the leaves in the canopy. The adults feed on the leaves in the canopy, and the larvae feed on the phloem, which girdles and kills the tree. Girdling basically means that as they feed under the bark through these galleries, it prevents the tree from taking up nutrients and water. So it basically just starves to death, and also dies of thirst. Like the bark beetles we were discussing earlier, the same situation occurs, except emerald ash borer are invasive and their populations grow out of control because there are no native predator populations to keep them in check. In fact, the places that emerald ash borer has infested in and on the East Coast have seen over 95% ash mortality. So that's what I'm talking about. Over 100 million trees have been killed in 30 plus states since the 90s. That's why it's so incredible what an amazing job that they've done in containing this pest in Oregon so far. So as you can see here, again, the galleries are shaped differently from the bark beetles that we learned about earlier in the presentation. They call these S-shaped. I guess you're kind of using your imagination there, but they're definitely more wiggly and serpentine. And next to those, you can see these little faces poking out of their signature D-shaped exit holes. And this is what the adult beetles produce when they chew their way out of the bark after they're finished laying eggs. If you see these in your ash trees, it's a really good sign that you have an emerald ash borer infestation. Other signs are thinning or yellowing crowns. So this is the crown of the tree up here. It'll look yellow or like it's not growing in well. You will get these crazy stump sprouts growing from the lower trunk and roots. So that's a stress response from the tree. Also woodpecker damage. So where the woodpeckers are going after the larvae, which does help with population control, although it's not enough to keep them completely at bay. This feeding will cause something called ash blonding, which just means that you'll see these lighter patches where the woodpeckers have been feeding. This is really easy to spot. It's kind of like a beacon in a hardwood forest. So yeah, that's called blonding. Um, Management, so stopping the spread may be unrealistic if it gets too far, but using an integrated approach can slow the spread of emerald ash borer into new areas. This is one of the reasons why I just love forest health specifically so much, is that we really rely on integrated management approaches because large scale chemical control is not realistic in a forest setting. It's expensive, but also, I mean, you can't exactly spray so far into the towering canopies, and even if you could, you wouldn't want to for the untold ecological effects that would be associated with that. So we have to get creative and think of other ways, other tools in our toolbox that can help us create these outbreaks. So I did mention that you can effectively protect high-value trees with insecticide stem injections. They're costly but effective, and they need to be reapplied every 1 to 3 years. So it's not good on a large scale, but it's definitely good if you want to protect a tree in your backyard. Biological control agents like parasitic wasps can be released. They actually have been released in Oregon, and they were released to pretty good success in Michigan. These can slow the spread, and they're a great addition to chemical control for our IPM approach. So these guys are really neat. They will basically inject the freshly laid eggs with their own eggs, and then their young will devour the eggs and chew their way out, parasitizing them, and then flourish within the tree of their own population. It's so cool. Also, human behavior can have a huge impact on emerald ash borer spread. You can remove and dispose of infested trees if EAB has been detected in your stand, but do not move this firewood. So I really need to put this map in here. I keep forgetting. But you can see with invasive insect pests like emerald ash borer, there's another fungal pest, fungal disease called laurel wilt that we're dealing with in the southeast. You can see it jumping county lines and then jumping state lines, and that is not natural spread. That is absolutely due to human behavior. So I understand that, you need firewood. I grew up with a wood stove. Like you need to be able to provide firewood to heat your home. But if you are doing that and you can't harvest off your own property, it's really important that you find somewhere within your county and don't move that firewood too far. Definitely don't travel to campsites across state lines by bringing your own firewood. That is how these guys are spread. I'm always a wet blanket at my campouts with my friends, but yes, this is no. It's really important. I just wanted to let you guys know about spotted lanternfly. Again, it's one of these things that aren't here yet, but they could show up at any time because they're really, really good hitchhikers. Um, they're native to Asia. They were first detected in Pennsylvania in 2014, and they've since been spotted in several mid-Atlantic states. Um, they have no known natural enemies in the United States, like many other invasive species. And the nymphs are excellent jumpers. The adults have these bright red spotted wings, and egg masses are protected under this sticky cement substance. So it is easily, do I have a picture of that? No, not here. So it is easily transported on vehicles. It's like it's just kind of looks like that spray insulation stuff. And so they can move really long distances. You can see that they spread right along the railways and the primary roadways in the Mid-Atlantic where they're spreading now. And they have not yet been found on the West Coast, but they're a potential pest of fruit, ornamental, and woody trees. And they're definitely a pest in vineyards back east. So that would have a huge impact in Oregon and Washington, as you well know. So luckily, they're really easy to spot. So if you see one, the campaign right now is just to stomp it out, which is, a little barbaric, but it works. Certainly report it. Again, you can go to your nearest extension office. You can call me. You can call the USDA in your area or the DNR. We will help you get it reported to the right channels. All right, I know you guys remember this fellow. Other names are Asian giant hornet, Native range in Japan because where the loose translation is bee the size of a sparrow. Back in 2020, when we definitely needed more problems, the New York Times also dubbed it as a murder hornet, which was absolutely problematic and alarmist. It does not murder people, it murders bees. There was no reason to call it that. It was first detected in British Columbia in 2019, where the nest was found and eradicated. This is another really great success story. Later that year, a specimen was found in Washington. Weirdly, it was strangely late in the year for the hornets to be flying, and a dead one was found on someone's doorstep, which I always thought sounded pretty ominous. Um, so it's native to Asia. It's known as a pest to managed honeybees. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it can become a huge problem. It can kill a healthy honeybee hive in just a few hours. Obviously, this is going to have major repercussions for agriculture and everyone else since they're crucial pollinators of our food supply. It's also a predator of many other insect species and other native pollinators like yellow jackets, wasps, and native bees. Luckily, they're easy to recognize. The closest thing that we have to these in Washington is the aerial hornet, which is actually a yellow jacket. It's a lot smaller. These can be 1.5 to 2 inches long, but the real distinguishing characteristics are this big old yellow-orange head, and the last abdominal segment is usually yellow. You can see here. If you find this, turn it into the WSDA. That's really, really important that quick action is taken. You'll most likely see them in the fall. However, the good news is they were not spotted at all in the last 2 years. The WSDA had a swift and effective response. One nest was eradicated in 2020, 3 additional nests in 2021, and none were spotted in 22 or 23. And after 3 years of negative surveys, this pest will be considered eradicated. So that's really cool to see. And I know in this specific case, there was a lot of citizen science involvement too, which is also just super uplifting when you get to see a success story like this of so many boots on the ground working together to make sure that we don't have a really big problem. All right, I am going to breeze through this last portion in about the next 10 minutes. And it's just more pests of potential concern that I just want you to keep your eye out for. These are all non-native invasive species. Or they are native species that are in our area but are emerging as important pests because they seem to be damaging more host trees in areas where they hadn't in the past. Um, this is a common issue that we are seeing nationwide, also globally. I just got back from an entomology conference for the Pacific branch where folks in Alaska were talking about that they are seeing new native species having devastating impact on their timber industry because of climate change. Suddenly, areas that were previously uninhabitable to these species are now warmer and drier. And so they have all of these new types of tree species that they can feed on, which is why suddenly we're having issues with native pests that we never did before. Um, okay. So the velvet longhorn beetle is an emerging generalist tree pest. It's undergoing a rapid global range expansion facilitated by human activities, so moving firewood more than likely. It's native to Eastern and Central Eurasia. It has an incredibly broad range of species it will attack, over 40 genera. And they also target weakened, diseased, or damaged trees, as well as healthy trees. And they can reproduce even in dried wood, including firewood and pruning slash. So even if you take the trees down and you are thinning your forest so that it is at a healthy density, you still have to worry because they could be reproducing in your slash pile. And they can definitely live in dried out firewood, which is how they're spreading so quickly. Their documented host list is super vast. I won't read through it, but it includes apples, stone fruits, maples, oaks. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And the other problem is that it's their identification is not super definitive. It will help you rule it out from the other banded alder longhorn beetle, but it's pretty bland. Like it's hard to tell what you're looking at here. It's pretty cryptic. Um, it will likely blend into the background and go undetected. So this is kind of like a doom and gloom insect that we're certainly worried about and also don't feel too hopeful that it's going to be that easily spotted. Um, so damage characteristics associated, prefers trunks of larger branches and mature trees. Um, Look out for the rapid decline of otherwise vigorous trees. And you can see, let's see, the populations there already widely established, and introductions are continuing throughout wooden products and products being shipped through wooden packaging material through the ports, like I mentioned. It's definitely here. It's just that we don't yet know how much damage it's capable of and how far it can spread, since it's a relatively recent relevant species. Yes, so these are the new areas that it's recently been clocked, popping up in. You can see how widely dispersed they are, so that's really not a good sign. Mediterranean oak borer. So this is a new event. This is definitely one that is hot on everybody is talking about it in all of my meetings. I was just assigned to a task force. My colleague Joey Holbert and I are going to be running a symposium at the end of the month discussing Mediterranean oak borer. This is a non-native ambrosia beetle. Ambrosia beetles are closely related to bark beetles, but they can be even more damaging because they carry fungi with them. They inoculate the sapwood with their fungus, and then they say that they farm it. So they feed on the fungus inside of the sapwood. That fungus is laurel wilt that I was previously describing. That's killing avocado trees, laurels, and sassafras in the southeast. That's spread by an ambrosia beetle. So there's a lot of cause for concern here. It appears that this is on the move. It's really prolific. It has 2 or more generations a year. Um, and I am realizing I'm running out of time. So I'll just say, yeah, identification, keep an eye out, I would say mostly for this black stained galleries only in the sapwood. If you cut down a tree and you notice this odd staining, it's a good indicator that you may have an ambrosia beetle problem. And if you cut down that tree because it's dying, that's an even better indicator. You can see its frass is different. It's like whitish, powdery frass. So that's another good indicator. Also, keep a lookout on your oaks. Sadly, this really does target oaks, and I know that oaks are already in some danger here. So just be aware. Again, I'm going to have this recording posted, and I'm happy to share my slides as well. If anybody wants to look into this further. I think I'm just going to finish up with this California five-spined ips just because it's a really good example of just what I was talking about earlier. This is a native pest, and until 2010, it was not known to exist above the Oregon border, but by 2018, it's been located throughout Washington. Its range is expanding, probably due to climate change and hotter temperatures and drier summers creating more tree stress. Um, Last summer, there were dead trees reported in Renton and Bothell, and California five-spined ips beetles were found in those trees. So we need to keep an eye out, especially because these are likely to become an issue for pine management on the west side of the Cascades. And previously, timber producers who prioritize pine species didn't have too many species to worry about. So this is a new one, and it seems like natural predators are not keeping it in check. Keep an eye out for this new needle discoloration that fades from orange to reddish brown, top kill stems. Again, though, healthy stands can tolerate some pressure of California five-spine ips beetle, so try and keep your stands as healthy as possible. That's always your greatest defense. Thin trees properly, time/management to avoid times when the beetle is feeding and breeding. So that's from March to July. That's a good idea for most bark beetles too. We don't know if it's reoccupying a historic range or moving northward, but just know that it's becoming more of an issue with frequent drought, and it's definitely on our radar. Okay. Talk about bronze birch borer. It's not that big of a deal yet. I will be sure to send these resources out, just like Rachel did, with the recording at the end. And I can send out the links in an email so you'll have those clickable as well. And I think, yes, we got about 10 minutes left for any questions that may have come in. Whew, I know that was a lot of information, guys. Thank you for sticking with me. Okay.
Thanks, Molly. So just so far, just one question in the chat. A theme that seems to have come up a bunch is these insects reproducing in slash piles. Would
Mhm.
keeping the window between generating and processing slash type be helpful?
Yes, that's a really you asked and answered. That's a really great solution. If you are able to, I know that all of these management practices can be expensive and time consuming and exhausting, but the less amount of time that you keep the down. Of course, I know it's like you ask us these questions, and the answer is inevitably it depends, because a lot of times you're like, oh, well, you want to keep down slash piles because it can be habitat piles and they can be great habitat. They can provide nutrients into the soil. Like all of this is true. But if you have historically had any sort of beetle problem, or your neighbors have, it's a really good idea to, yeah, go ahead and process, which could be mulching, it could be burning, depending on the time of year and the size, and get rid of those slash piles as quickly as you can. That's a great question. I see some of you folks did put your emails into the chat box for me to send that publication, so I will certainly be happy to do that. I'll get all those copied down right away. Oh, Karina. Oh yeah. So I know Karina lives in Plain, so maybe not burning out in Plain, but yeah, if you can mulch those slash piles, that's a great idea. And if anybody is coming up with questions now, feel free to unmute yourself. And I mean, you have that control, so you can turn on your camera and unmute yourself and just ask us directly. And I'm happy to answer any questions that come up.
Hi, I'm about to replant 10 like 20 acres. Is there any like new planting or what I should be prepared for reducing possibilities? I don't know. Because if that, I don't know if it makes sense. I have a toddler, I'm sorry.
No, it's great. I'm glad they're along for the ride. Yeah, it's basically avoiding insect attack. Is that like, is that what?
Yeah. Healthy to create a healthy, anything new to create a healthy forest, I guess.
Kelsey, I would invite you to maybe respond to this, or this is definitely Kelsey's line of expertise, but I know that there's a lot of really great tree sales out there, where you may be able to source the seedlings for a better price. And then also just, well, so Kelsey's the service forester coordinator, and this is a really excellent service that the DNR provides, especially in Washington, where you can reach out. I'll send you a link of their portal. You can find who the service forester is for your county. And if you haven't already chosen the species that you think you would like to plant, this person can help advise for, your site, your location, other issues that you may have had historically. They can likely suggest some good species that as options, and they're free. It's part of being a tax-paid employee, government employee. Did I get that right, Kelsey?
Yeah, we say prepaid in terms
Okay,
of taxes.
I appreciate that.
But
Yeah.
yeah, Lynn, I would reach out to either your service forester through DNR or a conservation district forester. I know we have some people from the conservation district here. Someone who deals directly with landowners, and they can help you make a planting plan that's great for your site. If you're talking about, reducing slash to keep, beetle infestations at a minimum, if you're planting into an area that has a lot of slash, then you could reduce that before you plant. So maybe you've got piles, you could burn those, you could do some chipping. Yeah, but taking care of the slash before you plant would be a good idea as well.
Great call. Oh, Nick Coons,
Thank
who
you.
works at a local, at Whatcom Conservation District, just shared a really excellent resource. Nick, feel free to hop on if you'd like to. That looks like it's a guide for small forest landowners for planting for climate resilience guide. So this looks awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, Nick. And folks, that's right in the
Awesome.
chat. If you want to gather that up, make sure you click on that.
Yeah, and Holly, she is our outreach person for DNR. She just shared in the chat the landowner assistance portal. So that's where you can go to find out where your local forester, what their contact information is.
Okay.
Perfect.
I have some of that, but that's great to have it all together. Perfect. Thank you. I'm new at this, obviously. So.
Glad you're here, Lynn.
Okay.
Looks like a couple more. Oh, a good book I've been reading is A Forest of Your Own, The Pacific Northwest Handbook of Ecological Forestry by Kirk Hansen and Seth Zuckerman. I don't think I have that one. Thank you. I'm copying that down. Someone just added in the chat there. Okay, let's see if we got any more. Yes, yes, yes. Newly published. Cool. Thanks for the tip. Okay. Okay. Well, I think that's it. I'm not seeing any more. Guys, I would just say, please feel free to reach out at any point. Oh, Jose said, where is that guide from Nick? Just scroll up in the chat, but I will also include this in my email afterwards. I'm going to include this, and I'll also include the link of the recording of this talk too, and all the links that I included at the end of my presentation. Cool. All right. Thank you all so much for coming. Reach out to me directly if you have any questions about any of this stuff. Remember that we do have our final presentation is coming up at the end of May. It'll be May 26th. And that's going to talk about abiotic factors that are stressing out your forest. It's going to be a really interesting presentation. I'm definitely going to learn a lot from it. I'm really excited. So be sure to come back for our final installment. And then we've even got one coming up in June too. So word is spreading. I cannot thank you enough, you guys, for supporting us in this sort of like new vulnerable stage of trying to get this organization up and running in our state. So it means so much that you're able to be here so late on a weeknight. On that note, feel free to email me if there are other times that you think you would prefer. Should we try this at lunchtime during the week? Would that be annoying or would that be good? Should we do it an hour later, an hour earlier? What's the word? We're just here to accommodate you guys, so let us know. Okay. And with that, I'm going to go silent. I will just hang out here in case there are any other questions, collect people's emails from the chat box. But I would say that's it for us tonight. Kelsey, thank you so much for being our fearless leader. I really appreciate you.
Excellent job, Molly.
Oh, thank you. Alicia. Lorna Smith. No, I didn't see your message. Check for my message about organic. Oh, sorry, I missed that. Okay, here we are. Okay, I see it. I will email you a response directly. All the ideas to do the equip organically. Okay. Okay. I'll put you in touch. Lorna, if you're still here, where are you located? Sorry, guys, don't feel like you gotta hang out. I'm just copying email addresses out of the chat. Make sure that I get these.
Okay, I'm gonna head
Yeah.
out. Thanks, Molly. That was great.
Kelsey, you're the best, dude. Appreciate you.